Maybe I'll talk about Ambience, which is a real-time scribe that sort of records the nuances in the conversation between a patient and a doctor, freeing the doctor to really make eye contact and provide those visual cues to give you a better experience. How many of us have been in the doctor's office and your doctor is like behind a screen, like poor doctor, like typing, they're stressed out, they're frazzled, they're trying to document, and at the same time listen to you. And so Ambience does a really phenomenal job, actually, a very accurate job of capturing structured data, writing the note for the physician. I did an example encounter with them, and I was just mind blown by the accuracy of the note. And then you can take that further and apply it to billing and to other administrative tasks as well. So I'm really excited about that. There's other competitor companies. I think there's Suki and
Abridge,
yeah. Which has a partnership with.
And just to be clear, like scribing, especially for our two doctors up here, I mean, scribing, dictation, nuance has been around. Microsoft bought it. Dictation's been around for a really long time. But now with the addition of generative AI, Fawad, how is it different?
Yeah, look, I think there are lots of exciting stuff happening in clinical, and with the exception of radiology, I think everything else is sort of being discussed, not being deployed. I think we just have to be honest about that. There's not a whole lot of clinical AI out there that is generative AI. I think there's classical AI, what we call OG AI. There's lots of that out there, but there's none in generative, and I think rightfully so. Because the excitement is there that if you can use generative AI for clinical, you can solve a lot of big problems. But the downside is also quite significant. If you don't get it right, you could really impact people's lives and outcomes. So I think the area that I'm most excited about, where I think there are shovel-ready opportunities and the market is giving us an indication that it's ready to adopt it, is in administration, and ambient and scribing is an example of that. There's so many processes that clog up our healthcare system. I've done the math, there are like 9 of them, right? And they cost $1 trillion a year to this ecosystem where we're faxing and shoving documents from one place to the other. Things like prior authorization, risk adjustment, claims adjudication, coding. These are high value opportunities with very low risk in terms of if you get it wrong. So I think that's where AI is really shovel ready. Generative AI is shovel ready. It's also ready because the problem and the solutions are finally a match, right? Because classically speaking, healthcare is built on documents. Many of those documents used to be faxes, and now we've evolved, and now they're PDFs. They're still documents, right? Yeah. So this is the innovation that's happened in the last 15 years.
You guys know it.
But the classic intelligence layer that we had was data warehouses, data marts, data lakes. They don't deal in PDFs. They deal in structured data, nicely, cleanly laid out tables and columns. And you could never get there. But now, with generative AI, with large language models, they love unstructured data. They love reading documents. So the problem and the solution finally match, and I think therefore it's not only ready, it's where it's being adopted.
So these are the good things about kind of where we are in this technology shift but Monica, I mean, given that you're on the legal side, you're dealing with all the ethical, safety, we heard the prior panel talking, your best friend talking about responsible AI. What are some of the limitations as we move into this kind of nascent regulatory market?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think, some of the issues we're facing is that we don't know yet, because this is not, the use of AI in healthcare is not very well regulated right now. Healthcare is, and I'm biased, one of the most regulated industries. I'm looking at, and when we're advising clients, we're advising them, we're first of all asking, what is your risk tolerance level? What are you looking to achieve? How are you looking at implementing AI within your organization? Right now, we are seeing it's much more on the administrative side. It's really not on the clinical, really because of the risk. But there's risk on the administrative side as well. Anytime you're dealing with data, you have privacy concerns, you have ethical concerns, and there really is an unknown. I equate this to digital health and telemedicine going back a number of years ago. So back in 2017, Foley, we actually conducted a survey of hospital, health system executives, clinicians, all about digital health. And what are the impediments, to implementing it? Why aren't you using it? 1 was uncertainty. 2 was unknown regulation. 3 was reimbursement. How is this going to make us money? You have a lot of, CMS, are they going to accept, the use of these technologies? And then the regulation is disjointed, because in the digital health world, and I'm afraid we're seeing this with AI in healthcare, it's really state by state regulated. So you have individual states that will have practice standards, licensing laws, individual consent laws. Then on top of that, you have layered federal laws, such as HIPAA and other, privacy acts and, considerations. And how do you actually deploy a model that allows you to comply with all the various regulations when you don't know what they are?
So let's just level set here. I mean, many of you guys have been listening to a lot of talks about sort of what we call the commercial foundation models and even open source models. And I think if you're trying to create models for healthcare, right, you've got very discrete language and vocabulary. It's extremely precise. And how do these foundation models stand up? Is there going to be one model for healthcare? And if you've got a bunch of startups that are building application layer solutions on top of these foundation models, like GenAI wrappers, what does that mean? So I'd love to have some commentary on the models.
You want me to start?
Yeah, well, you got a lot to say about this.
my favorite topic about this, right?
Yes.
So we humans are natively biased. I don't mean by just the ethical biases, racial bias, things like that. Like if you go to a doctor in California versus Boston, how they manage a particular disease is different. It's based on how we are trained, who was our mentor, what their expertise was. So you may get a certain type of recommendation on how you should be, treat getting surgery done, or no, maybe radiation therapy for this is better. That's based on the institution's expertise and people, how they train and all that stuff, right? And it's so variable. So when you are training a model that doesn't account for underlying practice patterns, you're going to make wrong decisions or decisions that may not be applicable to their particular practice, right? So I'll give you an example. There's one type of Cushing syndrome that is very unique. There is one clinician in Mayo Clinic that sees about 80% of those patients, right? So unless how she manages those patients and the best outcome she has seen, how do you get that data? How do you train the model? Like, how will you actually replicate what the best person has done? Otherwise, we're making average docs, right? That's what we are doing. But then what happens in rural communities, right? When you don't have those options available from a treatment recommendation point of view, like how does that happen? So it is so important that in healthcare application development side of things, the models you're using are actually trained on actual patient data. You have thought through the biases in it. I'll give you one perfect story example of it, right? So in Microsoft, when we're building a risk of death prediction model for patients coming into the ER with, like likelihood of death because of pneumonia. So we were surprised to find out that model predict that asthma is a protective effect on death. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Asthmatic patients are the one that you're most afraid of, that if they get pneumonia, they'll die if they're not treated immediately. Like, what is going on? Why did model predict that? What we realized that in the underlying data, the ERs, the patient data that we got, all those ERs had a policy. As soon as the triage net saw a patient with asthma and pneumonia, patient went straight to the ICU. Did not spend time in the ER being evaluated, right? So they were aggressively treating it. They were getting faster intubations, more aggressive antibiotics, and they were surviving. So the model learned from looks like asthma was a predictor of survival. So asthma patient don't need to be aggressive. That was prediction coming up, but that's the bias.
I'm going to give you, and so I'm Dr. Laura Jana. I am a pediatrician. I've worked sort of as a freelancer in the space for about 20 years trying to figure out how to insert data into the healthcare system that's outside the healthcare system and HIPAA, FERPA compliance. First data point, just to support all of what you said, is there is a physician moms group that's about 70,000 members on Facebook. And I will tell you, you know what the excitement was around when ChatGPT was released? Auto-generating the letters to make sure that people got insurance coverage. And they didn't even care if it was accurate. Who cares if it hallucinated? Because the insurance company would then say, oh, we got a letter, it got approved, and it would save them hours a day of writing the letters. So that was the use case of reinforcing the administration.
I love that you shared that because I'm part of that group, actually.
So, but my question for you has to do with this idea of context, because I look at it from a healthcare and a person standpoint, but clearly in AI, this context window and the expense of it. except we all know context matters. We now have statements like 80% of traditional healthcare outcomes are determined by things outside the traditional healthcare system, all the adjacencies that you mentioned in terms of sleep and nutrition and things. Are you seeing a challenge or an eagerness to adopt this and the financial incentives being applied so that you can incorporate, whether it's coaching or these adjacencies or things outside the healthcare system when you're creating these models? Because clearly if you don't input that, you're missing a huge opportunity.
I think absolutely financial incentives drive so much of what we do in healthcare. And when you're talking about healthcare systems and you're talking about companies trying to plug in and sell to those healthcare systems, they're looking at things like, is this going to reduce physician burnout? Is this going to allow our physicians to see more patients? Is this going to increase their ability to do more work? And I think we need to restructure how we think about that also societally and systemically, because you can't have physicians seeing an unlimited number of patients just because they're doing no administrative work, right? Like there is still that human connection and that level of thoughtfulness that physicians need to be able to sort of have and in those clinician interactions. But speaking to physician burnout, I think that's a real thing, and it's a huge thing that we're going to see causing a lot of problems. I coach a group of young female attendings at Stanford and a few other academic institutions, and 60% of them are burnt out and ready to leave medicine. So hopefully, I'm excited about these AI applications as supplementing their ability to continue working.
I'm just going to add one thing. So when I was at Kaiser, we got really good at building hospitals. It takes us it takes Kaiser about 5 years to plan and build a hospital. It takes us 17 years to plan and build a new doctor. Right? So it's easier to build.
And about $300,000 worth of debt.
Yeah, it's easier
debt.
and quicker to build hospitals than to create more doctors. That's where the constraint is. That's where the burnout is really going to impact the health outcomes.